And joining us now in studio to discuss how the outcome of today's gold sector wage talks will impact on South Africa's mining industry is Claude Bizek. Of course, Claude is the Executive Director of mining advisory firm Unomics in Cape Town. We are joined by Jacques Bertha. He's the mining economist at Pan-African Investment and Research Services. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. Let me start with you, Claude. Of course, we've been hearing a little bit of leakage from the media that there has been a 4% counter offer made to the unions. This is obviously a far cry from the 60% to 100% demands that were placed on the table. Is this even a starting point for the unions? What do you think the likely response will be?
Well, it's always a starting point because that's what a negotiation is about. You know,
Right.
someone has to start by asking for something and someone has to start by responding to that, by offering something. And we know that in this particular dance, in general, we start from very different point. This year, however, is exceptional, not just because of the general environment and the post-Marikana instability, but also because indeed we have this competition between now two labor unions who are effectively upping the ante. And they are upping the ante in terms of asking for wage increases that are far beyond inflation and far beyond what the industry, which is now in distress because of prevailing economic conditions, but also because of continuous increase in wages that are beyond inflation and beyond productivity gains. So we are in a difficult situation, and everybody expected that we would have very difficult round of negotiations.
Let me just quickly jump to you, Jacques, with the comment that Claude makes about the rivalry that exists between the unions that are actually at the deal table. Do you think that given that the mining houses have decided on a strategy that puts forward a united front where nobody is expected to break rank, that the rivalry amongst the unions is perhaps going to be their biggest downfall as they sit at the negotiating table?
Yes, Nazipa, I think I agree with you. I think yes. I don't know whether that was also leaked, but I picked up on the media that AMCU doesn't want to sign the agreement. I don't know whether you've got any confirmation of that. Did they sign the agreement today?
From where we stand, no agreement has been signed as yet. So we're obviously at the venue waiting for the slightest to come out, but nothing's as far, nothing yet, Jacques.
So apparently the others have signed, but AMCU did not want to sign. So I agree with Maurice. It's really it's a very sad situation where NUM became quite knowledgeable about the realities of the economics of mining, and were not that unrealistic in their demands. But if you find that somebody's taking away your members, if you don't equal their unrealistic demands, you've got to join, and that's unfortunately the situation. So we've got two strongest unions are both very unrealistic in their demands, and I fear what some of the workers, because that's the only information they get, is that we want that, we want to give you that.
But Jacques,
I fear what some of the workers will do.
But Jacques, let me throw in.
Definitely won't get it.
Let me throw in a rather difficult question. I think at this particular point in time, what would be considered to be a good outcome for the industry from these negotiations?
Oh, you ask me. It's like an Eskom outcome. You know, it's the same. Eskom has this different problem, a solution. We all want electricity to be under inflation. So I tell you now, even if the wage increase was, let's say, 5%, or it's 4 now, let's say it goes to 7, even there, we will have quite a few of our mines will have to close shafts, and some of the mines will actually totally close down. We've had a constant reduction in mining output over, about 10 years. Now the last numbers that came out, 14% reduction in output production this year. And if you look at the three big mining houses, if you take what gold price they need to carry on expanding, or just stay there to explore and to increase capacity, in other words, pay for the cost of staying in business, the gold price should be between 1.4 and 1.7. So we know now the gold price is not even, it's 1,280 now, I think. It's more or less there. So We are not, even if we just give them a zero wage increase, the industry is going to die. So I suspect a realistic expectation would be, if it was maybe only NUM, but I'm worried with AMCU, it would have been the inflation, maybe a 5.5% wage increase. And if you had to ask me what a realistic, because also the workers would I think at least the workers could say, well, at least we can maintain our cost of living.
Let me quickly throw it to...
It's a really difficult situation.
Jacques, let me quickly throw it to Claude on this end. Of course, Claude, we know that in this particular situation, the government sits between a rock and a hard place. I mean, they've got the mandate to not only sustain, but to create jobs. And we have this situation where we have falling labor productivity, as Jacques has alluded to. We're seeing the gold output on a consistent decline across all the big players. And my question to you at this particular point is, can the industry absorb any more of this tension? And as Jacques has put it out there, are we really seeing an industry on the brink of collapse?
I think it depends what industry and what companies you're talking about. But Jacques, alluded to the fact that a lot of the mines are now operating at a loss or marginal. And what's extraordinary about that, and how serious the situation is the fact that gold prices are still very high in historical terms.
Right.
You know, the mining industry in South Africa was profitable and doing well in the 1980s and 1990s at gold prices that were a fraction of what we have today. So we've had an incredible rise in gold prices, averages. Of course, it's not as high as it was last year, beginning of this year, but this is still very high. And the indictment, on South Africa as a whole, and everybody shares a responsibility there, is that we are not capable of making money with that kind of gold prices. And there, yes, you point to government, but government has a responsibility in this too. It's not just labor cost, it's also energy cost. And we know that South Africa's energy policy has largely failed and is failing. Unions have a tremendous responsibility for failing to educate their workers and tell them and guide them to what is realistic for their own good. And obviously industry has its responsibility in the sense that maybe they expanded and invested too much at a time where prices were unrealistically high and created a baseline expectation which cannot be met at this point.
But what is your view then on the argument that what we are seeing in the mining sector broadly is really a manifestation of deep inequality that exists? The miners are looking at the affluent lifestyles of the mining executives. This in turn is fueling their demands and obviously driving the violence that so often accompanies many of these wildcat strikes. If that is the correct perception, at what point is South Africa going to get to a break-even point?
It is one of the perceptions. The bottom line is that there is no truth. There are several truths that people have from their own perspective and see reality from that standpoint. But obviously there is also the economic reality of what's achievable and not. So yes, indeed, South Africa has a record of inequality and exploitative labor practices quite some time back. And I think that feeds into this complex and this political economy which is charged with lack of trust and a somewhat oppositional way to deal with these things. And yes, there is still tremendous amount of inequality when it comes to wages and wage disparities. And mining companies have to some extent recognized that and are working on it. But we have to realize that we won't be able to solve all our problems through 2 or 3 years of wage negotiations. What we're going to do is that we are going to break the camel's back. And when the camel's back is broken, nobody's going anywhere and nobody's getting water.
Right.
That's the bottom line. And so I think, government is, and the Deputy President is very, I think, courageously, to a sense, trying to bring all the parties together and create an inclusive proposition. But we have problems there too. I mean, AMCU was walked away from that particular agreement because there is a lack of trust. Frankly, I don't know how we get out of this. And perhaps, the pessimistic outlook is to say, well, we need to let the chip fall where they may. We need to try to reach a negotiation, and that's what's happening now. Undoubtedly, that will be of no satisfaction to the parties, whether Labour or companies, and a lot of the companies are going to suffer. Maybe, some maturity is required, and that maturity can only come when economic pain will be evenly distributed.
Economic pain evenly distributed?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes, evenly distributed, because everybody's going to suffer.
Right.
The mining companies, their shareholders, their employees, and the South African economy
Some
as a whole.
degree of compromise, that's what you're calling for, from all parties involved.
Everybody, and absolutely, everybody has to, I think, get off the position of principles and get into reality. But I just a personal experience. I was deputy MD of an airline in Africa 10, 15 years ago, and I was in similar situations. And I can tell you, it was nearly impossible to get the unions to even accept how bankrupt the airline in question was. So sometimes even economic reality doesn't hit home until it's too late. What I hope is that there is enough trust and confidence and reality, a sense of reality, that people start seeing at the greater good, in the sense of what's not in their interest tomorrow politically, or tomorrow in terms of organizational
but for the benefits of the larger industry.
And their own jobs in 2 years' time.
Let me bring you back, Jacques. Of course, I mean, to a large extent, some of Claude's comments that he's just made now hinge on domestic sentiment. But of course, we know that we have an international audience here, especially in terms of international investors that have to understand the dynamics that are currently shaping the gold industry in South Africa. If we look at the fact that South Africa has already seen a sovereign downgrading earlier this year by the big credit rating agencies, how much will the outcome of this particular negotiation, how much impact will it have on South Africa's risk rating?
Well, if the workers, if we get another Marikana situation, which I doubt, I think government is so ready for that. If we have strikes, which we may have, protest strikes, and the people who will suffer there are more that will be the workers, unfortunately. But looking at the international perception, there is, of course, in many developed countries, which we are classified, like in Chile, we also have strikes. We also have strikes where, as Claude summarized the South African situation up incredibly well. But also that's the irrationality of workers. They get worked up. And with this, so internationally, I think the international world, as long as we make money, as long as we can see that we can get the mine, we can be profitable. As long as our mines can be profitable. Now, that's the problem. Our mines are not profitable. So that the workers are upset and that they are trying to get their best. And the process, that happens everywhere. But South Africa really, really needs, and I think we can see the government is aware of that. They're really trying hard. And it is really, we are between a rock and a hard place. Even COSATU has research, and they understand that the mines need to make profits to carry on growing, to open up new shafts. But they can't. I think they're very reluctant to try and tell that to the workers now. They may. I hope they do. They should actually. I hope they do.
Of course, we know. Of course, we know that, Jacques.
As Claude has said, it's difficult.
I'm sorry to jump in there, but I'm saying, of course, we know that the unions are out to also restore credibility amongst their members. And so it's going to be very difficult for them to accept, especially anything that sounds like a 4% counter offer. In your view, how do you think the outcome of these negotiations is going to impact on how the gold industry in South Africa will look like post-negotiation?
Well, already the gold industry in South Africa is getting smaller and smaller. The gold is now not even number 3 as far as commodity exports. Iron ore seems to be, our research shows that iron ore is now catching up there. So the gold industry, you'll see more stoping machines, more underground technology. I was at a plant of a major underground company that manufactures stoping machines, and they have incredible orders. They say they really can't stay ahead with their orders. So that's the one problem. It's a very sad situation where we already have such a high unemployment rate that we're going to lose more jobs. And we're also going to lose some of these underground mines, some of these reefs can only be mined at this stage. There are now technology that's in experiment by workers, and it's so we're not going to look good.
Of course.
The gold price, our outlook, our view on the gold price is that the gold price is not going to look good. We see the gold price sort of battling to break through 1,500 for this year, but slowly but surely. That's another story. I don't know whether we should talk about gold now. You can ask me questions about that.
Yeah, let's leave that story for another time. But let me quickly throw a final question to Claude. Of course, Claude, we must remember the fact that it seems as if wildcat strikes and the violence that accompanies them actually deliver. Even if it's been at the cost of lives. With that in mind, what does this say about the bargaining council mechanism in the industry?
Well, I think the bargaining council has been shown to have failed. And there are political economy reasons for that. There are political reasons for that, but there are also organizational labor law reasons for that. So, I mean, it's very clear that right now we are in a kind of transition phase in the mining industry from that standpoint in South Africa. And therefore, as Jacques pointed out, we are also in transition from a technology standpoint. The paradox is that this is a country, and he pointed that, so this is a country with a massive unemployment problem, where we have unrealistic wage demands and we have wages that keep increasing faster than productivity. In fact, productivity is declining, which means that our economic proposition is not valid. So, and I think to some extent, all these elements, the bargaining council, the productivity issues, the cost issues, all these things are tearing one another apart.
Okay.
And something has to give. So what we can hope, is that this negotiation is probably going to get to a head. I think there is going to be tremendous amount of disagreement and potential strikes.
Of course, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there.